Hi, I'm Brian Jackson with Infotech Research Group, and today I'm in Seattle with Jessica Fang. She's with Amazon Web Services, and she's the head of generative AI go-to-market for them. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I just crossed 7 years at AWS, which has been pretty astounding. It's been a crazy time here. I've been really fortunate to work on some of the most disruptive technologies. Worked on serverless. As you know, AWS invented Lambda, so really brought that to market. And then transitioned to working on our developer tools. And obviously today we're talking about Amazon Q and really what that means. But I get a really fortunate role to speak to a lot of our customers, work with our teams, and really help kind of bridge the gap between what are we building to who are we actually solving the problem for.
That's great. Wow, lucky number 7 years, so good for you. And we are doing the deep dive on Amazon Q today. And I remember covering the launch of it last year at re:Invent. So it's an AI assistant for the enterprise, I would say. You were at re:Invent last year too, so how has your year been, by the way?
It's been a year. Has it only been a year? It feels like much longer than that.
Not even.
Amazon Q is, I think, more than an assistant, right? It is going to be your trusted advisor. It's going to be sitting there beside you, really understanding how you're working, what you are working on, and giving you the best practices, your internal data and information from your organization right at your fingertips. I think that's a really special place in terms of where we are in terms of the broader kind of market industry.
Yeah, I remember covering it and, of course, writing about it since then, too. It's a fully managed service from Amazon, part of the application layer of your generative AI stack when you look at the whole strategy. And there's 2 different versions of Amazon Q that are available. You have the business version, you have the developer version. Both cost $20 per user per instance of Q per month. And do you want to just distinguish the difference between those 2 things?
Sure. I think you got the description really right? We have 2 flavors of Q as we know it today. The pricing models are a little bit different than how you described, but without getting too much into the details, it's really about, one, Q Business is for your knowledge workers. How do you take advantage of your company's information and bring that to the rest of your organization? Q Developer is really trying to reimagine the software development lifecycle. And what does that mean for building, operating, maintaining, modernizing your applications on AWS?
Right, because we should say that Q, not only does it connect to Amazon Web Services, so your IT department can manage these services through like a natural language interface, but it connects to all your enterprise data stores too, right? We're talking about third parties like Microsoft 365, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and so on.
Right. I think what's really interesting, and I've been really focused on the developer experience just because I think that's going to be the new way that our customers interact with AWS. And so if you think about the planning, the designing, the purity phase of any application lifecycle, it really does start with your company's internal information. What are you trying to build? What are the specific guidelines or guardrails or specifications that we have? All the way to obviously writing code, right? How do you actually get a developer more productive within the IDE? And then it gets into, well, now that it's out in production, what does it mean to operate it? How do you troubleshoot issues when it comes up? How do I know where to go look within my environment if there's if some alert is going off? And then, as you can probably guess, in Amazon's kind of broad development lifecycle, how do we actually upgrade and modernize these pieces? We do have language upgrades today as we know it. A lot of that is coming kind of more broadly in terms of addressing not just the developer productivity piece of it, but development productivity.
Okay, gotcha. And you talk about connecting Q to your enterprise data, which is the critical part of it that makes it so valuable, right? That customizable layer. And one of the interesting ways that's happening is with Q Apps, right? Which was launched back in June. So with Q Apps, it's a no-code interface. So you don't know, if you don't know how to code, you're fine. You just go in and you tell Q what you want it to do. You connect it right to your process, right to your workflow, and to the data that's valuable to you. Tell me a little bit about Q Apps. How has that evolved over the last few months?
Yeah, I actually think Q Apps is one of the features that really gets me excited as an individual. So as a little bit of backstory, I'm a failed developer. I tried to do computer science in college. I cried every night because my program couldn't compile. It was like learning a new language. There were nuances and enunciations that I just couldn't quite grok. But with the advent of Gen AI, and I think what has manifested in Q apps is the ability to use natural language to write these applications. And I think what's so special is customers like Volkswagen, they were able to upload 3,000 of their job descriptions into the single app so they can look at it worldwide in terms of how they distribute that. So for me, that's really the cusp of, what does it mean to actually break down barriers and democratize information and knowledge to your broader organization. So Q Apps, what I would call their fraternal twin, is something called Party Rock. It was built within Amazon, and similar to Q Apps, it gives you the ability to really understand how to leverage LLMs. And so I have this amazing but very chatty manager who loves to talk to me during meetings. And so I'm trying to concentrate. I haven't coded, as I alluded to, haven't coded in many years, but hopped over to Party Rock, built her an app that I called Meeting View. It told jokes, it gave her memes, it gave her someone to interact with that wasn't me so that I could go back to my meeting. I think that's the power of what we see in Q Apps is how do you take all this information and bring it to the broader organization that may not have had the time or the resources to develop that technical skill, but they can still build applications.
Yeah, I like how you offloaded all the small talk that you had to do with your boss to an AI bot. I think you've got a killer use case there. I also made a Party Rock app when I attended reInvent last year, and it was one where people would type in their physical characteristics like height and weight, and then they would be compared to the most likeness of an NFL player that's active today. So they'd get sort of their NFL twin. Not bad, right?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious which one's yours. What's your NFL player?
Oh, I don't remember. Probably somebody on the defensive line, I'm going to guess. But you mentioned this use case with Volkswagen, right? And that's really what I want to hear more of from you is how are people using Q today, right? And you're out there talking to customers every day, I know, about how they're deploying it, what they're doing with it. So you've been at this, not quite a year yet, but I'm sure you've got some interesting use cases to share with us.
Right. I think when Gen AI really came into mainstream, a lot of the leadership teams within our customers, they thought, what is the most difficult problem I have? And can I smash it up with the technology we have today? Well, what we quickly realized is it's actually really complicated to put together all our thoughts and knowledge and wisdom that we've built up as humans. So we started somewhere else. We started in, for example, the IDE, in the developer writing code. How do we actually remove that toil? And so a really simple use case that we've seen a lot of our customers really understand is just developer productivity. I don't think a developer really wants to be more productive. They just want to work on the things that they love doing, which is probably building new applications, new experiences. And so how do we remove the toil from that piece? And so that has been kind of a core piece in terms of how do we get them focused in the flow, talking to an agent, to Q, who can kind of pair a program with them alongside them. The next piece that we're really hearing, as you can probably guess, is technical debt. Right? We're working with some of the most strategic, the largest enterprises out there who have really moved fast to build new experiences for you and I as consumers. But that means how do we help them address this modernization aspect? The other really interesting piece that we focused on is retiring tech debt at scale. So with Amazon Q transformation, how do you upgrade old Java to new Java? I'm sure you've seen a lot of the news out there in terms of how Amazon has done that internally. And so those are really easy ways for our customers to very much kind of dip their toe into understanding how to leverage Q. And now we're thinking about, well, it's not really just about the developer. It's not just about developer productivity, the individual. It's about development productivity. And so how do we think across the SDLC to really remove toil from that process and give customers and give the end users time back to focus on what's really interesting and inspiring for them?
Yeah, I've seen how good the generative AI bot is at translating from legacy code bases to more modern code bases. And I've read about all the time that it's saved at Amazon, and I'm sure your customers are benefiting from that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you may be aware that Q is not the only generative AI assistant that's available on the market. And in fact, our data at Infotech, we see that another one is becoming entrenched pretty quickly in the enterprise. So tell me about your go-to-market plan with Q.
Sure. I still think we're really in early days. And it goes back to the fact, I'm sure you've seen this stat, 70% of a developer's time is actually not writing code. It's on the other parts of the SDLC. And so how do we take a step back and look at people who are debugging, testing, writing documentation, doing things that maybe they would want somebody else to actually go do. And so we're taking this very holistic view across the SDLC and figuring out what actually makes sense to offload some of that, that muck to those agents. And so taking that approach, I think, will really transform what it means actually to interact with AWS. And so as you have likely reported on, Q sits at the top of the GenAI stack. But I think today, as we know Q, it can take on tasks that are, 5 or 10 minutes long, something that maybe you and I could do in 5 or 10 minutes. But as the underlying infrastructure gets better, as the models get better, as our ability to articulate what we want it to do, and then its ability to actually go execute that, as that gets better, I think you're going to see more and more of that proliferation and the ability to work alongside a lot of these agentic workflows. And so for AWS, that means transforming what it means to be your AWS expert and really bringing to the forefront what's really actually important to you.
That's interesting. So you see that as a differentiator, maybe taking Q to the point where it's more like agentic AI and automating more of your tasks for you.
I think that's where it's going to be. Today, we see Q Business, we have Q Developer, you see Q and other kind of AWS services. In the future, it will be your AWS expert. So I think the future of how you interact with generative AI, whether it's more obvious or whether it's under the hood, I think that's the future, given all the best practices, given the years that our internal development teams have had in working on and developing on our cloud services. I think that is what's really going to transform the experience of engaging with a cloud vendor like us.
Yeah, and I have to ask you about the guardrails. So for customers that are concerned about generative AI because they're not sure about what might happen with their data that they share with these models, or they're worried about the quality of the outputs that they'll get back. Is it accurate enough, right? Is it maybe biased in a way that could harm us down the line or harm an outcome with a customer? So tell me a bit about how Amazon puts the guardrails in the control of your customers.
Right. So Amazon, as you know, takes responsible AI very seriously. And so we're thinking about the data privacy and the compliance that we're really trying to protect our customers with. When we started looking at Q Developer or just how coding companions would work, we quickly realized, especially with AWS, with Amazon, that code really was our IP. And so we were very conscious in terms of how we built as you mentioned, the guardrails that sit alongside the underlying infrastructure, all the way to giving the controls to our customers' organizations. And so for Q Developer Professional, we don't use any of your data. We certainly have features like customizations, which leverages a RAG model so that you can get more customized recommendations back to your organization, but we don't use any of that to train it. We recognize it is such an important piece of what our customers are building their businesses around, and so we're taking a very kind of strong stance in terms of what that is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, give us a bit of what the future holds. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect to hear about the next iteration of Q.
Sure. I think it still goes back to AWS is going to be, or Q is going to be your AWS expert. And I think what's really exciting for me is how Q is going to manifest itself in a lot of different AWS services, and how do we extend that experience that we started on the developer side to other personas, the operators, the data scientists, the database, the DBAs. And so I think that proliferation is going to be really interesting. And we also know that most of our customers don't just work on AWS. And so how do we actually help our broader ecosystem of partners and customers really get the full advantage of generative AI? And so I think there's a lot of really interesting experiences and features and functionality that we're working towards for reInvent, and excited to share a little bit more once we get to that point.
That's great. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me here today and for all the insights that you've shared about Amazon Q.
Thank you.
For Infotech Research Group, I'm Brian Jackson.